So what are the 10 most common mistakes made by writers? Stick around. Today we'll take a look at which errors seem to give student writers the most problems and take a look at how you can avoid making those errors yourself. The information I'm sharing with you today comes from a research study that I will link down in the description in case you want to take a look at just where these particular errors came from and how they ranked as the 10 most common errors made by writers. I will tell you that this study looked at college freshmen and the number and types of errors that they make in their writing, and the research was looking at final drafts of writing more so than, say, first drafts or standalone drafts. So this was actually writing that students had worked on and revised and edited, and it was collected from all across the country, and the findings are in the research study that I will link down below. And the thing that makes it really interesting for me is that there is also information about similar studies that were done in 1917, 1930, and 1986. So you really get a good idea of what kinds of errors student writers have made over the past 100 years. And hopefully, as a writer or even as a teacher of writers, you'll learn how to avoid those errors. Let's jump right in. The number one error that's showing up nowadays for student writers is using the wrong word. Now, in the older research studies, the biggest problem was spelling, but now that we have spell check, that problem has moved considerably down the list. Now, students spell the word correctly because they use spell check, but they often use the wrong word because they're not aware of subtle differences between words that sound alike but are spelled differently. I'm going to put a link right up here and also in the description that will take you to a Never Stop Learning playlist that helps you with determining word choice and when do you use which word. Check that out, and I hope that'll be helpful. The number two problem, which kind of surprises me because I would have thought that it would have been a bigger problem for students to use too many commas rather than not enough, but the number two problem is that student writers omit necessary commas after introductory words, phrases, or clauses. So, for instance, if you have a sentence that says, "Truly, I want to be honest with you," the student writer might leave out the comma that goes after truly, or if you are using a prepositional phrase to introduce your sentence, you might say, "Running all over the yard, my dog played all afternoon." Main clause is "my dog played all afternoon," but there needs to be a comma after that introductory extended prepositional phrase that says "running all over the yard." Or student writers leave out necessary commas when a dependent clause starts out a sentence. When writing a complex sentence, if the dependent clause comes before the independent clause, a comma is necessary. So here's an example of that. When he left the store, Jimmy was very happy with what he had purchased. You need a comma in that case. If you simply say Jimmy was very happy with what he purchased when he left the store, you don't need a comma. I'm going to put some links down in the description and also up here for you so that you can link to some video lessons from Never Stop Learning that will help you with sentence structure. Okay, the third most common writing error that students make is probably not going to surprise anybody. It is errors with documentation and citation. I think this is really difficult for students because they're so seldom asked to do it. They're not asked to really start doing it until quite late in their student writing career, and because they do it with so little frequency, it just is difficult. So that's not very surprising. The fourth most common writing error is vague pronoun references. For instance, using a pronoun to which there is no antecedent to be found, and the antecedent is the actual noun that is used that the pronoun replaces, usually within the same paragraph or maybe even an adjoining sentence. The fifth most common problem is just plain old spelling errors. And it's so interesting that we still have these problems even with technology, because I'll tell you, in the research study that I'm getting this information from, most of the papers that were assessed to come up with all of these errors were actually word processed. So students did have access to spell checks. So either they ignored it, or they chose a wrong spelling when there was a choice, or maybe they just don't know how to turn on spell check. I'm not really sure, but spelling errors, even after 100 years, are still a problem for student writers. The sixth most common writing error for student writers is in the area of quotation marks and correctly punctuating dialogue. Again, I'm going to put a link in the description, and up here, if you are on a desktop, you can just simply click the link up there, and it will link you to some lessons from Never Stop Learning, 3 in particular. One explains how to punctuate dialogue, and the other 2 are ways of practicing how to punctuate dialogue. So even though it's a skill that students begin to learn in 2nd or 3rd grade, it still is difficult. And even though it seems like, well, shouldn't they have gotten this down by now? What happens is, as the level of the writing gets more sophisticated, it's a more and more sophisticated task to punctuate those quotes in that dialogue correctly. So it's not like, oh, well, they learned it, but they forgot it. No, indeed, what happens is they learned it, but now they're writing at higher levels, and they need to learn how to use these kinds of skills in a more sophisticated manner. Okay, well, here it is. I knew this one was coming. The 7th most common writing error for student writers is unnecessary commas. I always told my students to omit a comma if they were not sure whether or not they should use a comma. That's a pretty good rule of thumb. The 8th most common writing error has to do with capitalization. These are mostly capitalization errors with proper nouns and with the nouns that are capitalized that shouldn't be capitalized. The 9th most common error in student writing is missing words. And again, this really doesn't surprise me, because with word processing, students can look at their draft and there's no spelling errors and maybe no grammar errors are even showing up. Unless that student actually takes the time to read his or her draft out loud, it's very easy to overlook those missing words. And especially because when you're typing text, you can sometimes go more quickly, obviously go more quickly, than if you're handwriting it out. So missing words doesn't show up as an issue up until the more current times when people are using word processors and those words just get omitted and never picked up on, unless that student actually goes through and reads his or her draft out loud, which is always a great way to check not only missing word problems, but also all kinds of issues having to do with coherency and flow and organization and just what we call syntax, or how well a sentence is constructed. Reading your text out loud that you just wrote is just a step that you don't want to skip. It's so important. And finally, The 10th most common mistake made by student writers is in sentence structure. And Never Stop Learning has done some video lessons on sentence structure. So again, I'm going to link them up here and also in the description below. Please check those out. Maybe you're not sure how to make compound sentences. Maybe you've got run-on sentences or you've got comma splices. These are all problems that are considered to be sentence structure errors. So do check out the other lessons that we have here for you.